I'm Mark Ramsey. I'm really pleased to have with me today Eric Dean. Eric is Vice President of Business Development for Midroll. What is Midroll, you ask? Eric, why don't you tell me what Midroll is?
Sure. Mineral Media is the parent company, which probably makes it sound a little bit larger than it is, of Midroll, which is the advertising B2B sales business, and Earwolf, which is our consumer-facing comedy podcast network. We're a podcast sales firm. Fundamentally, that is the Midroll side of the business. We represent about 120, 130 shows at this point. At any given moment, about 20% of the iTunes Top 100 are represented by Midroll. In most cases exclusively. There are a few exceptions. And yeah, we're doing great.
Give me a sense of what the market's like out there. And we've seen statistics on the fraction of the population that actually consumes podcasts and so on, but you've seen the actual metrics. You get to lift the hood and look underneath. What's going on in the world of podcasting? What's the usage like? How big is it? Give me a sense of metrics that people may not have heard before.
Right. Well, probably a good place to start is to think about the top of the heap, which is This American Life, right? The single largest individual episode download number has got to be This American Life. I don't know it in perfect detail. My sense is it's probably about 1 million downloads an episode. I think you'd find that number quoted other places. And if that represents the pinnacle, that's effectively a million listens to a show. Mm-hmm. A comparable metric on radio, I don't like to use Cume because Cume is looking at the audience over essentially a span, some time span. I think AQH is probably the better number. That's the number of simultaneous listens to a show. So the AQH on This American Life is probably below 1 million at this point. So they may be at a point where those two audiences are, in some cases, digital may be larger. But they're probably comparable. Similar things happening other places in public radio, where some of the largest public radio shows are having single episode download / listen totals that are comparable to the AQH that they're getting. Now that's just comparing essentially the size of the audience, right? How big is podcasting? How big are individual shows? Well, if it's 1 million listens for a show like This American Life, there are frankly television programs on network television that have smaller audiences in certain time slots. There are absolutely HBO shows that are doing less than that. So we are now finally at a point where the individual instance audience for single episodes is becoming comparable to other media. And I think that's really why we're starting to see interest from advertisers, from media companies, from others in this space.
You used an interesting expression. You said starting to see, because legitimately podcasting, despite being around for a number of years, this notion of on-demand audio is still a relatively new vehicle for advertisers. Can you talk about how that's shaping up right now and about some of the interest that you're seeing and hearing out there?
Right. It's interesting. I think it's sort of like the early days of cable. It's a new medium. The measurement isn't perfect, right? There's not a standard. You're not necessarily getting, in the early days of cable, Nielsen couldn't measure some of those tiny audiences. Mm-hmm. So we've started to see, and this is changing, but initially it was a wave of direct response advertisers. And today's DR advertisers are not the same that were there 10 years ago. It's a lot of very forward-thinking, quantitatively driven digital businesses, people like Stamps.com and Squarespace and Bonobos, who actually don't care as much about the measurement from some accredited third party. They care more about results. Mm-hmm. So they come in, they see a relatively affordable buy, they experiment with it, and then through various tracking mechanisms like discount codes, vanity URLs, tracking URLs, and just simple analysis of what their lift is in any given time period, they see it's working, so they come back. And the more and more of those advertisers who come into the space and have results, the more others jump in. Then you get endorsement agencies and other agencies sending their clients. And then gradually the brands start to tiptoe in. And definitely over the past 2 years, we're seeing more and more traditional brand advertisers coming in. We were starting to see it in public radio. We're starting to see it here at Midroll. But there's still a lot of that early direct response. And frankly, that's a lot of revenue for us and a lot of very happy advertisers.
Sure, absolutely. Now, those brands, those are the people that are going to be looking to the standardized metrics, though, right?
Yeah, because there's a structural challenge, which is all of those larger brands, whether it's a car manufacturer, and we're not even talking about the dealer associations, which have whole other challenges, but if it's an auto manufacturer or some large luxury brand, or some sort of apparel manufacturer, they're going to have an agency. That agency is going to have a structure. Within that structure, there's going to be some group that's going to have to do the buying for medium X. And if they can't find you on MediaOcean or whatever their demand side platform is, at some point there's some relatively young buyers that says, I can't do this. And you've got planners to say, there's no way to be accountable for this. So they're all these challenges and all of these obstacles, but again, that is changing, and certainly agencies are a lot more experimental than they were 5-10 years ago. There are plenty of other media out there that do not necessarily have an Arbitron or a Nielsen or a ComScore even vouching for them, whether it's promoted posts, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google AdWords. When you start to see results, you stick with that, and once they get big enough, then I think it'll find its way onto the planning systems. And there are things going on right now that will make that easier.
Well, all of those examples you cited are examples where results can be measured, like direct response, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, it seems to me that the upside, because direct response, the tactics you measured, you indicated there, that those aren't brain surgery, those aren't even new.
Right.
But it would seem to me that there's a huge upside even for those, because since we're dealing in a world where more and more advertisers want accountability, here you've got the ability to convey that accountability as well as anyone else through the tactics you indicated.
I mean, completely agree.
What's the upside for advertising on podcasts?
For the advertiser?
I mean, where do you see it going is my question. For advertisers, for podcasters, for media?
I certainly see it growing, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is, no matter what the source of data, whether it's Edison data, our own survey data that I saw when I was in public radio, there's a clear demographic divide. And frankly, the younger a person is, the more likely they are to listen to podcasts, on-demand audio, whatever you want to call it, the less likely they are to listen to terrestrial radio. There's obviously a change coming in the next 5 to 10 years in-dash programming. There will, I think, come a point when it is just much easier to listen to whatever is on your smartphone, whatever's in the dashboard, than to necessarily find one local AM/FM station. That's already becoming easier. I think we're not there, and you've got several years of phasing out the old fleet for that to really come in and take impact. But just smartphone penetration alone, demographic shifts, everything favors the medium that we're operating in, which is really, it's on-demand audio. It is the same switch that's occurring in video, right? It's happening. It's already happened there with Netflix, with Hulu, with the Rokus and the Apple TVs, and even just cable on-demand. It's already happening there. I think with audio, radio works pretty well, and it's a nice, easy, lean-back experience, and so it hasn't been as ripe for disruption. But I think there have been a couple of technological changes in the past 2 years that have reduced the friction from on-demand audio so much that it is now becoming much more widespread. I mean, it was a real pain before, right? You had to have your iPod, you had to plug it in, you had to sync your list up, you had to find the stuff, there was all the downloading, and then you had your player. It was more than I think the average consumer necessarily wants to undertake, and the people who did are really engaged in it. Well, now, you open up your phone, the podcast app is there by default now. You open it, you pick a show, and you start streaming it. It's very, very, very easy.
Yeah, even still, there are people who don't know what podcasting is, but but increasingly, knowing the terms and how to access the content is becoming less important as those distinctions become more transparent and invisible to the average user. And as you say, with evolution in the car in terms of Google Auto and CarPlay and so on, it's almost impossible to imagine that the experience of on-demand audio isn't going to be more a function of the in-car experience, and no one will ever have to know the term podcast.
Right. I mean, you don't say, hey, do you watch videos? Well, of course you watch videos. What do you watch? Oh, I watch House of Cards, or I watch NCIS, whatever the show is. You think of them as shows, or I watch anything that's on HBO. We're going to get to that point. Oh, I will listen to anything that's on Earwolf. I listen to WTF with Mark Maron. I listen to This American Life. Not I listen to podcasts. That just happens to be the delivery vehicle.
Well, right? And this is one of the issues, though, relative to radio, because so much of radio is lean back. Here's a stream of music. Here's an hour of music that's interchangeable with any other hour of music. That's not really the market you're going for. You're going for the lean forward market where people are interested in a particular show with four corners, right? And this show is
Yes.
available anytime you want it, regardless of its source, commercial radio, podcaster, native podcaster, public radio, whatever, right?
Yeah, and I don't think that you necessarily have to have one without the other. There are plenty of places where we can go today, whether it's TuneIn or Slacker or Radionomy, to create a 24/7 lean-back stream. We could create a comedy Bang Bang stream, put that out in the world. We could certainly even syndicate our content out to terrestrial radio. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But in a world where people are used to on-demand content, I don't see a lot of companies racing to recreate the broadcast television stream. Nobody's trying to recreate that experience, because people, if they want that, it's still there. And otherwise, they're finding the content on demand. They're watching it in the way they want, at the schedule that they want, and that becomes the preferred mode of consumption.
So to clarify, Earwolf is not going to iHeartMedia saying, please syndicate our content across your radio stations. That you're saying that's what's not happening nowadays.
Well,
right?
no, I'm not actually that. I'm not ruling that out. Let's put it that way. But we're not dependent on that.
You're not ruling it out, but there's been plenty of time for that conversation to be had, right?
True, but we're a relatively small firm in the grand scheme of things, and we have plenty of opportunity in the on-demand piece. And the other nice thing about on-demand podcasts is that you are directly engaging the audience, and you, thanks to the strange way the ecosystem has evolved, there's not a gatekeeper there. There's not a single channel you have to go through, and so if we have a direct engagement mechanism through the podcast, we don't need to get it out to syndication. We don't need to get it out to some distribution mechanism, because it already exists. It's there. It's nice if we can do that to grow the audience potentially. Like, hey, let's expose the 50 million people listening to app X to our content, and maybe some tiny percent will convert. That's a great audience growth mechanism, but that is definitely not. That's not where the money is, so to speak.
True. It did work for This American Life. That's worth saying. Let's talk.
What do you mean? You mean recently, or?
No. I mean the fact that they're on the radio first and foremost.
Oh, right. But I mean, they started on the radio a long time ago.
Yes,
right.
I know that. I know. There is a time issue there.
Right.
Give me a sense of case study. Through a case study, give me a sense of how you pitch this to an advertiser. How do you pitch what's the pitch? What's the story?
Right. And really our head of ad sales could probably do that better than me, but I'll tell you, the fundamental pitch is we are selling a truly native ad. In the vast majority of cases, the shows that we represent on mid-roll are selling host-read spots, meaning the host, the talent, is voicing the spot, or at least somebody within the show is voicing the spot, so it sounds truly integrated. It is not a disruptive, out-of-listening experience like you would find on Pandora, someplace like that, where you have song, 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 Burger King ad, song, 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 Burger King ad. It's just a real nice, gentle flow. And so you have Mark Maron, and he's talking, and then he's talking about Squarespace or Stamps.com, and then he's going back to the show. The user is more likely to stay engaged, to listen, to feel like the host has a relationship with that sponsor. Mm-hmm. So we find typically that our audiences are far more likely to buy products that are advertised on the shows that the sponsors of the show, or that the host of the show talk about. In surveys, we find it can be 60-70% say that they have purchased something that they've heard about on a podcast. They tend to reputationally hold those sponsors in higher esteem. They're not jumping out of the experience. So my guess, I don't have any proof of this, my guess is that the recall, either aided or unaided, is going to be better in the long run. It's a very nice native advertising experience. And the other nice thing is, because it's baked in, it's essentially aggregator proof, right? We can take that piece of content with an embedded ad, and we can send it out anywhere. It doesn't matter if somebody re-ingests it and reserves it. Frankly, it doesn't matter if it goes to BitTorrent. The only issue is the more platforms it's on, the more places we have to measure it and report back to the advertiser. But it goes with the content. It carries with the content.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So in the commercial radio example, we would refer to that as an endorsement.
Exactly.
The difference
Absolutely.
is what you've got there is you've got endorsements with accountability built in, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. You can measure the delivery. I think there's still a question about, well, how many people are actually listening all the way through, and we'll get there. But for now, we're giving actual delivery of the spot, which is more than radio can do today, because it's all based on Nielsen sampling, Arbitron sampling, whichever company you want to use.
Even beyond that, there's the direct. Most of those endorsements have a direct response component.
Yeah, absolutely. And so people use the codes, they use the promo codes, and the advertiser can track effectiveness. I do think there's still, for people trying to build brand awareness, there's a huge opportunity there that is not yet fully realized, where even if there's not an immediate direct response, if the host of the show is talking about a brand in a really favorable way, that is going to stick with the audience far more than, again, an injected creative that sounds nothing like the show itself.
Okay.
And you see this in other media, right?
Yes, absolutely. So if I'm a broadcaster with a slate of podcasts in my archive from my popular morning show or whatever, or a podcaster with a popular podcast, whether I'm commercial or non-commercial, how can Midroll help me?
Well, we can sell your advertising spots, and because we know the market, we know the advertisers. We work with 100+ advertisers right now actively, and we're growing that every day. We have a sales team, we have sales support, we understand the system, we have data about who's buying what. We can probably sell your ads more effectively than you can. That being said, we are the podcast advocate. We're not the brand advocate. We're not the agency advocate. We're there for the podcaster first and foremost. And that means podcasters, first of all, have veto power. If they don't want to use the sponsor, it's not going to work because we can't force them to read an ad that's essentially endorsement style without really liking the sponsor. If they want to sell their own spots, if they sell some sort of sponsorship with another brand, we can let them do that too. We are there fundamentally as their advocate, and that means not locking them into some sort of arrangement that's not going to work. But there's a threshold above which we can probably help them and below which we're unlikely to be able to.
Sure.
That threshold today is around 50,000 listens or downloads, whatever you want to call it, per episode. So if you put out a piece of content and within 2 to 4 weeks, 50,000 people are listening or consuming that content or more, then that show is at a point where the price of the spot, the size of the audience, all the things start to come together that we can start to get results when we bring that to market. If it's a 5,000 listen show, it's going to be very hard for us to monetize. The actual buys are tiny. We can always try, and actually for some shows that are more niche, that are clearly very sellable, we'll go below that threshold, but 50 is the kind of benchmark where we are today.
Okay.
That being said, we're happy to field any and all inquiries from podcasters and broadcasters about the material that they have. In some cases, we have to help them figure out what their downloads per episode are because they don't necessarily know. I would say if you have good content and you're looking for help monetizing it, then absolutely just come see us at midroll.com and we'll help you out.
Do you care about what platform I'm on? If I'm on Libsyn, if I'm on SoundCloud, if I'm hosted on WordPress? I mean, does it matter to you?
Yes and no. There are some platforms that it is easier for us to pull the stats from. And for now, we're reporting back to advertisers on the number of listens by checking the official stats from whatever that platform that is. SoundCloud is the easiest. We partner with them. We host Earwolf on them. We often arrange for accounts for Midroll clients if they need one, and we can pull stats from their API directly. We're working on adding other platforms, YouTube, etc. Today, if you're not on a platform that we pull from automatically, you just have to go update the stats manually on a per episode basis so that we can get a count of the delivery. But as long as you can measure per episode, and you can do so in a way that's going to produce some sort of audit trail, then that's sufficient. We don't require you to be on SoundCloud. We don't require you to use some particular ad server. That's kind of the beauty of what we do.
Give me a sense, and you may not want to give me this number, but I'm going to ask just the same. Give me a sense of one of the more popular podcasts. You don't have to name what it is. One of the more popular podcasts that you guys are selling. What kind of money is there to be made?
I will give you this because it was quoted in Fast Company. For the next year, 2015, we expect at least 4 mid-roll shows to gross over $1 million each. And those shows all have downloads on a per episode basis in the mid 6 figures, sort of 200 to 500,000 range. To give you the other end of the scale, if you have a show doing 50,000 listens, then we would expect to sell a mid-roll spot in the $1,200 to $1,500 range, and then you'd add a certain number of spots per show. So that's the huge range, but that's why we start with 50,000, because when you're doing a $1,000 spot, it makes sense for the advertiser. It's an efficient buy. It makes sense for us. It's worth the effort to try and sell. It makes sense for the podcaster.
Awesome information. Eric, that's awesome information. You know, there's so many broadcasters with so many podcasts just sitting around gathering digital dust, not being sold. And even if the people in the station know how many folks are listening to it. So what you're providing is a really
there are a
useful
couple
service.
of caveats that the broadcaster should keep in mind. It's different. It is very different than terrestrial linear radio. You really need an audience that is doing appointment listening, that really loves your show so much that they're going to seek it out, they're going to subscribe to it, they're going to listen to it. You have to understand the ecosystem that's out there, understand the importance of iTunes and the iTunes Store, understand the other mechanisms for getting out into the world, understand the value of social media. I think a lot of broadcasters, that's like just basic digital hygiene, and a lot of them are still understanding all of that, and you have to do all of that well in order for your podcast to actually succeed out there.
That's well put. Eric Dean is Vice President of Business Development for Midroll. Eric Dean, thank you so much.
Thank you.